So hello everybody, and welcome to the monastery where we've got the Design Insider talk, Power of Pattern. So I'm David Johnson from Newmor, and I'd just like to thank, first of all, you guys for coming to see us here tonight and taking part in the talk. And obviously I'd also like to extend my thanks to our partners in this venture, Panaz, New Hay and Telegraph, who have obviously helped put all of the sets together there, which I think we'll all agree are very beautiful and fantastic. So with that, I'm going to hand you over to Alys for the talk. So
thank you so much, David. Thank you. I'm so yes. I'm so lucky to have been invited to join you all here today by Newmor Wallcoverings. Newmor is a family-run business that launched back in 1967. And what's really important to them, and it's really important for me to make sure that you hear this, is that all of their wall coverings are produced here in Wales in the UK. Newmor have an amazing, extensive portfolio of wall coverings which transcend so many styles, trends, and textures. And they often add to that portfolio through their Newmor designer collections. Today, I mean, how exciting, we get to experience their brand new collection in collaboration with Print Pattern Archive. And really together, Newmor and Print Pattern Archive are two amazing pattern powerhouses. My name is Alys Bryan. I'm the managing editor for Design Insider, the online magazine. And one of the things that I'm really proud of with Design Insider is how we've built our platform to lead conversations just like this one that are really important within the commercial sector. Design Insider is the media partner for Commercial Interiors UK. They're a trade association, and they inspire and support the growth and the global success of not only their members, but also the commercial interior furnishings community as a whole. So, I can tell you, I can remember every one of the patterns in my childhood home. Who else can remember the patterns that they grew up with? Who can't but can remember their best friend's wallpaper? Exactly. I can remember the curtains in my childhood bedroom. They were blue, green, red, yellow, little houses and archetypal trees full of joy and that sort of childhood positivity. But in stark contrast, I can remember my parents' three-piece suite. It had been dragged through the mid-70s into the 80s. It was 5 shades of brown, paisley velvet. I know, special. And those patterns and many more that were in my home, they evoke memory, but they also evoke emotion. Now, those curtains, you know, they were in my bedroom, they were in my sister's bedroom, and then they went into storage for 30 years. And really recently, they've been hung in my baby nephew's bedroom. So they've now got a second life with the next generation, and that's something we're going to touch on in our conversation in just a moment. So we're here to talk about exactly that. We're here to talk about pattern as part of emotive design. We're going to touch on its role within luxury settings as well as across the whole commercial sector. And we're going to talk about why pattern is the tool that as a designer you need right at the top of your design toolbox within easy reach. Now, obviously, I am not going to do this by myself because I have got 3 amazing speakers joining me on the stage today. So Rose Campbell is the head of design and marketing for Newmor Wallcoverings. Rose is an extraordinarily talented designer because she understands people and she understands how those people live and how they want to feel in the spaces they spend their lives in. And she takes that understanding and her skills in colour, surface design, pattern, and texture to create the wall coverings that you enjoy as part of the Newmor portfolio. Welcome, Rose.
Thanks, Alys.
Cheryl O'Meara is the director and co-founder of Print Pattern Archive. Now, she is the custodian of the most incredible archive of patterns, which has got over 50,000 documents held within it, and some of them date back as far as the 18th century. She also delivers a portfolio of services which enable our lives to be enriched by pattern through product, fashion, and interiors. So welcome, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Sarah Wakefield is joining us as creative director for interior design studio Jolie. Jolie is so well known and have built your fantastic reputation on your understanding of colour and colour psychology. And within that, the role that pattern plays in delivering emotive spaces through the use of that pattern and colour. Now, Jolie launched in 2017 with their Manchester studio. And Sarah, I understand that it was just last week that you picked up your keys for your brand new London showroom. Not showroom, sorry, studio.
Yes, we have, literally last week. So the paint is still drying on the walls, and we have got furniture in now, which is great. But fantastic. Yeah, it's a very exciting time.
Well, huge congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So we are going to start our conversation all about pattern, and I'm going really straight to you, Sarah, because I think it's really important that, because we do want to touch on the importance of pattern within luxury, perhaps you could just walk us through historically what our perceptions of luxury have been and what role pattern had previously played within those, and perhaps whether that's changed.
Yeah, definitely. So I think when we think about luxury, everyone's got their slightly different definition about it. I think luxury previously would be really ornate patterns. It'd be really heavy materials, heavy fabrics. And that can go for also marbles as well, really expensive marbles, brass details. They all look very sort of glitzy and heavy and ornate. However, luxury has definitely taken a different corner and a different turn recently. We hear the words laid-back luxury played quite a lot. And I think sort of from a post-COVID world, we're really focusing on not how a space looks, but how it feels as well. And for a space to feel really luxurious, it can actually move away from the glitz and the glam and feel really comforting, really authentic, and really resonate with the individual as well. How pattern plays into that is really interesting, because pattern, for example, more of the organic shapes and the curves that we often see can make you feel really relaxed within a space, whereas the more geometric and bolder patterns can make you feel a little bit more focused and a little bit more energized potentially within a space. So it's really important to look at that full picture when designing and when selecting that pattern and print.
Fantastic. And it's not just how pattern is used within luxury spaces, but it's also important to address the sustainability that the use of pattern can bring to a project. Cheryl, perhaps you can just expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, sort of for the first time last year and this year, we sort of started pushing the idea of sustainable print, because we often think of sustainable materials. But what we're trying to get people to recognise is that when you're designing something, especially now with the circular economy and with kind of upcycling, that products have kind of more longevity. So if we're creating print for these products, then we need to think in terms of timeless design. So within the collection, the inspiration has been archive, but it's quite interesting. I have obviously a very commercial eye like Rose, but when I look at designs in the archive, when I first got the archive, there were certain designs that really stood out, and they would be the designs that everyone's drawn to in a print meeting that still now, and probably 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and reproduced now in another 100 years will still be beautiful. So it's been really interesting to pull that apart and learn about what the common denominators are in something that's quite magical and beautiful, and translate that into more of a sustainable movement. So thinking in terms of for example, we were working with Dunelm this year about the idea of how we can create print where, say, curtains that were sold perhaps weren't going off to the shredder to be kind of more sustainable, but actually being sold on upcycled platforms, as a lot of fashion brands have just started to do. Zara has their own brand now that's obviously an upcycle platform too. So it's just shifting that perspective really into sustainability with print. So actually with the collections, it was really important to have that in mind for me, to infuse with heritage and create this kind of historic longevity, which I feel is really important.
I think that's so interesting. So we're moving our mindset through the use of pattern away from end of life and more towards end of use and then second use.
Yeah. Like your lovely curtains.
Like our curtains. Absolutely. And Sarah, sometimes from your experience, you've been able to take that heritage design that Cheryl has just been talking about, but then reinvigorate it to more accurately fit your scheme or your project. Can you tell me a little bit more about that process and why you might choose to do that?
Yeah, definitely. I think, as interior designers, we see a lot of prints, patterns, different launches, not only for fabrics, but walls, floors, ceilings, etc. as well. And even though the new collections are great and they're really invigorating, there is a merit in looking back into the archives. A lot of the fabrics that we've used at Jolie, we've sort of delved into the archives and brought back an old sort of print and pattern, potentially from the 50s or the 60s, back to life by tweaking the colours so they're slightly more modern, they're slightly more fresher. So then when we're applying that within the space, it feels like a brand new fabric, yet the print was designed, 50 years ago or whatever that may be. And that's really exciting for us as designers as well, to give that new lease of life to those vintage designs, which Cheryl was talking about as well, and to really bring that creativity to a project. The way we do this at Jolie is we look at it from different ways. So, for example, if we're designing a building that's been built in the 50s, it might feel slightly foreign to put a different fabric that's a bit more retro, a bit more modern in that scheme. So we really do look at it from sort of the bigger picture and sort of what we want to create within that space.
Fantastic. Thank you for explaining that. Rose, I just want to move the conversation on ever so slightly to one of the things that I think everybody has heard being discussed recently is maybe a slight melting away of some of the traditional divisions between subsectors of the commercial sector. What does that mean in the use of pattern, and how have you seen pattern being used maybe differently?
I think we've seen a big shift away from very traditional sort of settings and traditional sort of preconceptions of how certain spaces should be. I think COVID accelerated that, but it was already happening before COVID, as in, people's homes want to look like boutique hotels. Boutique hotels want to feel more homely. Workspaces need to entice people back into the office since COVID particularly. People need to be in spaces that they feel comfortable in, that have something that resonates with them, makes them look forward to going into those spaces. We were talking about it recently, but if I'm looking for a hotel, the first thing I look at budget, I look at where it is, and then it's all about the decor. And I'm looking for something really exciting, something different, something that I don't have at home, but something that I can really say, wow, that was an experience. And I think people are looking for those really meaningful experiences now, and to go to somewhere that gives them something different out of life. I mean, obviously, there's all the Instagrammable moments and everybody wants to take their picture somewhere exciting. But I think it's more than that. It's really an emotional connection. And I think there's that nostalgic connection as well. We've seen through our trends this year and for the last 2 or 3 years, this strong nostalgia coming through in all of our trend stories. So whether it was the 70s that were coming back, and, now we've got this lovely vintage feel, there's just, people need to be able to feel that emotional connection to things. And even if it's subliminal, which most of the time it is, and they don't even know why they feel good in that space, but it is just comfortable and it resonates because it's something they've seen before.
Well, Rose, I'm really looking forward to seeing some Instagrammable moments on the scenes that we've got set up here with the new wall coverings later. But also, I think what's really key with what you've just said is that people want that relationship with the spaces they're in, whether that is a workplace or a hospitality setting or the care sector.
Yeah.
And so, and that is one of the reasons why these boundaries are being removed. We're designing for how people feel in the space rather than purely for the function of the space.
I think that's a really great point, Alice. And I think particularly in the care sector, you know, they were traditionally known as very functional spaces, easy to clean and, you know, low maintenance. And that's not what people are looking for anymore. We're seeing a massive rise in these 5-star care homes that are styled like a boutique hotel. Everything's beautiful, beautiful furnishings. Everything's really well thought through, exactly the same way it would be in any other commercial space. And I think, you know, as a person visiting people in those kind of spaces as well, it's really important that people feel comfortable, your family feel comfortable to see you there. And I think it's a massive boundary that's been broken down, actually. And I think that care of, you know, everybody should enjoy the space they live in. And I think that's something that's really elevating those care home spaces massively now.
Absolutely. Cheryl, we've talked about pattern as an interior tool, and obviously our conversation is going to continue with that. But I just want to really briefly touch on the fact that often pattern can also be used as a branding tool, can't it?
Yeah, it's quite a powerful thing. Like you were saying, Rose, subliminally, people don't realise that they have a schema for all sorts of print that they may have experienced, like you with your childhood curtains, with retro, with kind of, you know, it's a really powerful trigger that's instant, a bit like when you hear a track that you haven't heard for ages and you think, oh, and it transports you to a time and place immediately. Same with pattern, and actually in conjunction with space and lighting, it's the magic really sometimes I think that has that impact. And from a branding point of view, I think for years, you know, we would maybe do bespoke wallpapers and it might have the name or the brand. You know, now it's like a whole different, it's like, okay, it's like you were saying, the emotive connection, it's the values. And actually a lot of the time with heritage prints, it's about infusing trust, stability, longevity, history. So in a really subtle way, it does that job. And I think it's often overlooked, actually, as a really powerful tool to connect and to infuse values of some sort or another.
So it's a narrative tool within communicating their brand.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it can be very literal, and it can be, like you're saying, like an experience as you kind of walk in and are immersed in a space, and it's a sum of parts, but often patterns very much more literal than lighting or space. It can just instantly have that impact. So
and I think just to continue from that point, Sarah, you touched on it earlier about how different patterns can evoke different emotions. You know, they can be vibrant and enlivening, but they can also be calming. Can you maybe just talk us through some examples of how that's been achieved?
Yeah, definitely. I think as well, when we're looking at pattern as designers, as interior designers, we're looking at the full picture. So even though pattern can appear on upholstery and cushions, it can also appear on, you know, the pattern of the floor from the tile or the pattern on the marble worktop on the bar. So as interior designers, we're looking at that full picture. Pattern can be really successful when it's used in the right scale and the right quantity. It can also go the opposite way, which I'm sure we'll get onto. But for us, when we're sort of looking at an interior and bringing pattern in, we can bring it in much subtle references. So pattern doesn't necessarily have to be really colourful at all. It could be using the same colour in different tones. So it's a bit more of a tonal background to it. The way that we're designing spaces is we are looking at the space from a bit more of an experience point of view. So there'll be areas that we want to feel much calmer and much more sort of relaxing when you're in them. So we'll bring in a lot more sort of softer patterns within that space. Whereas there'll be other areas in the interior that we want to feel really uplifting and really invigorating. So that's when we can really be playful with pattern and be really bold and brave with that, and introduce it in very sort of dynamic elements within the space.
So within your sort of colour and pattern palette, are you also including patterns that you might find in wood grain or rattan or those types of materials as well? Were you considering that as part of your scheme of pattern?
Yeah, definitely, 100%. And everything down to sort of the touch of the material as well. So, you know, pattern like a wood grain, for example, feels really rough under touch. which is lovely. It feels quite warm and quite inviting. We always use a reference at a timber tabletop. You want to sit there and have a really long, leisurely lunch, but a marble tabletop looks beautiful, but it's actually really cold to touch. So you don't actually want to stay at that table too often, which is why it gets used in sort of cocktail bars or places that you can go for just one drink and then move on. So we look at all of that emotive behaviour as well, how material plays a really big part in that, as well as obviously the pattern and design.
That's really interesting how the material palette orchestrates the visitor's journey and their actual timeline.
Definitely.
Fantastic.
We look at spaces, for example, like airports. They're made with really sort of hard materials. And that's on purpose because they want you to get straight from security to your gate as quick as possible. And hard surfaces make you transition really quickly through a space, whereas softer surfaces make you want to linger and stay for longer. So we look at all of that when looking at sort of that customer journey through the interior.
So do you think when we're looking at sort of patterned wall coverings and patterns in textiles, you might find that they're used more in spaces that you want to hold people's attention in rather than those, fast-paced moving through areas?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's all about the line of sight. So I think it's sort of when you're looking at an interior space, what does your eye go to first? Is it the pattern on the floor? Is it the pattern on a upholstery piece like a sofa or an armchair? Or is it sometimes a pattern on the ceiling as well? And by sort of really sort of orchestrating where that pattern is, you're bringing that customer into that space without them even knowing. So it's a real sort of powerful tool, and it's definitely not underestimated within a space.
It's so clever how the time we spend in commercial spaces has been, we think we've got that autonomy over it, but actually we're just doing as we're told. Rose, I want to just go back to what Sarah said about texture, because the 3D element of pattern is something that I know you've got a lot of experience with, and that you've put a lot of development and expertise into how you've addressed that in this new collection. Can you just expand on that a little bit?
Yes, sure. So I think from my point of view, for my whole career, I think texture is just as important as the pattern. I think it can enhance the pattern and it can be a pattern in its own right. So as a vinyl wall covering manufacturer, pattern is our bread and butter, and our embosses, the amount of time and effort that goes into developing an emboss, it can take 12 months or 2 years to get an emboss right, because it's a big investment as well. And just the balance, making sure that it works from all angles, the way the light catches things. We have lots of embosses in our collection that are purely an emboss, no print at all. And all of the pattern comes from that etching of the steel that embosses the vinyl. So it's a really powerful tool. And I think in terms of our digital print, so particularly for this collection, pairing the right design with the right emboss, it can be magical. It's where the whole exciting part of the development happens. We did so much sampling for this collection, lots and lots of different things, lots of bases, and we talked about them and we had them around the table. And some of them literally, I mean, the vintage verdure, when we put that on the Cambria emboss, it was just like, wow, that's it. Because, the whole feeling behind the design was this French tapestry, and having it on that woolen emboss, it literally looks like a piece of fabric. It feels like you could just make a cushion out of it. It's so tactile. But I think tactility is a really important tool for designers as well. And I think, just like I said, putting the right things together and the layering of patterns can make a scheme in itself.
I mean, presumably the fact that it is a vinyl wall covering lends itself to being a bit more tactile. It's not got the delicacy that perhaps some of the other finishes might have.
Well, that's true, but we do have some very delicate embosses, and actually we can get so much detail into them. But one of the embosses that we've got that's really clever is called Peloso, and it's like a fur effect. So people are always amazed when they see it. Because amazing. It looks so real. It looks like a cowhide. Anybody that knows me knows I'm literally animal print nuts. I've got a cowhide belt on today, but I've literally got it everywhere. And it's something that I'd wanted to develop for years and years. And that took a good 2.5 years to get right. Wow. But just the intricacy of the movement within the fur, the angles of the way the light hits it, it looks like there's so much going on, and it's just a really beautifully engraved emboss.
So are there any sort of design rules or sort of rules of thumb that you might put a particular scale of emboss with a particular surface pattern, or is it experimentation and development?
There's a lot of experimentation, and I think even though, I've been doing it for 23 years now, and still I'm surprised sometimes. And sometimes when we're in that sampling, area of the process, we'll do 4 or 5. We did at least 4 for all of these designs. And like I say, some of them instantly you knew. Others you're like, oh my God, it works on everything. And but sometimes you choose something just because you think, I'll give that a try. And then that's the one. There's still always chances to be amazed by the difference the emboss actually makes on a design. I think, Sarah and I were talking earlier about when you see things flat and then getting to see them in real life. It's, for the beginning of any design process, it's generally all computer-based or print-based. And then when you see the final pieces coming off, the machine, and you see those embosses coming to life with them, it is a beautiful moment.
Well, that must be very similar experience to our event partners, Panaz and Telegraph Furniture, when they've designed a fabric on a flat, but then to see it on an upholstered form, it's completely different. Or in a drapery, how it hangs, it really changes, doesn't it? Absolutely. Cheryl, just to go back a little bit to what Sarah was saying about creating those different emotions. I know when we spoke previously, you told me about the mental health listening service that you developed, which is a fantastic example of specifically how you achieved that. So could you tell everybody a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so actually Janine's here, the director of the sanctuary.
Ah, great.
And my brief when I moved into the monastery was actually lockdown, so I was kind of twiddling my thumbs until the industry kind of snapped back into action. So I had a wonderful lockdown developing all the interiors in here and the ground floor, so it was quite interesting to approach Janine calls herself a radical psychologist, and I would agree with that, because actually the whole idea was to move away from the medical model, and it was a listening service, so it was very much less medicalized or doctor's surgery. We wanted a space really where we were thinking very much about the journey of the intimidation and the fear of someone coming in and having to feel vulnerable. And so the brief really for me was to kind of create as much warmth and homeliness and kind of inviting of a space as possible. So kind of using print within that and a lot of kind of plants and kind of that sort of home environment, it really helped me to understand how important it was to, like you were saying, Rose, move away those kind of sector borders and actually think freshly from the experience of the person using that space and what they need to feel and how their journey is through that. So it was a real lesson in how powerful sort of using the right print and kind of pattern is in that space. So
that's fantastic. Thank you for telling us a bit more about that. Sarah, right at the beginning, I mentioned your colour expertise and colour psychology. Can you perhaps tell everybody a little bit more about how your studio approaches that and how together as a team, pattern and colour come together within your projects linked to the psychology of what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, definitely. So colour is obviously really important to us.
Yeah.
And we do focus quite a lot on it at the very beginning of the project. Now, every colour has a psychology associated to it that most of us don't really realise and don't know about. We hold our hands up. We've not done that research. Scientists have done it in the field of neuroscience.
Sure.
But what we are doing is using that feedback and that knowledge when looking at interior design. So, for example, reds, for example, are quite a competitive colour. So sometimes we bring those ready colours through in our sort of wellness spaces or sports settings because we want them to have that competitive edge to them. However, red can also be quite dangerous and threatening, and we do associate it with that as well. Yeah. So what we do is we look at red from a whole spectrum of colour. So for this project in particular at Deansgate Square in Manchester, we desaturated it to that burgundy colour. So it has that hospitality look and feel, but the space still has that competitive edge to it. These are spaces that you don't initially recognise that it has that competitive edge, but when you're in it and you're experiencing it, you do feel it, which is really powerful. Similarly, with sort of spaces where you want to feel really calm and really relaxed, we can look towards, the bluey green colours. And the reason for that is we see them a lot in, obviously, nature and outdoors. And it's proven that even if we go for a walk in the Peak District, our heart rate lowers and we become a lot more calmer. So we like to bring those colours in more sort of meeting room settings or more workspace settings, so you can feel a lot more relaxed within that space and it doesn't feel as intimidating. But that's sort of up to us as designers to pick that colour palette. It's not obviously the primary colours, it can be all the way along that spectrum, but it's really sort of exciting to see our spaces being used in those colourways and see them being experienced for what the client wanted in the first place, which is really powerful.
Presumably it's really important, the relationship that you have with your client, to determine their end goals of how they want the user to feel.
Yeah, definitely. And at brief taking stage, that's one of the questions that we ask our clients. So we not only ask them how many covers do they want in the restaurant, or how much outdoor seating, but we also ask them, how do you actually want your guests to feel within the space? Like, do you want this hotel lobby to be really calming and really relaxing, a break away from the busy city? Or do you want it to feel really invigorating and uplifting? And when we get those sensory words at the beginning of a brief, we then build that interior based on that. And we found that by designing in this way, we eliminate trends. We don't design by, the colours that are trending, or Pantone Colour of the Year 2024.
Peach fuzz.
Which I'm not sure what that is. But we do just focus on, that experience. And some of the projects that we've designed 7 years ago are still really fresh and really relevant today, because we've based it on that human experience rather than what's trending on Pinterest and Instagram.
That's so interesting. It really is. I think we keep on returning the conversation to it being about the person using the space. And, I can just see that is going to be popping back up again as we talk. Cheryl, where Sarah says about how she works, obviously with her client, but how she works with her team to look across the colour spectrum, that process of taking a colour palette or a pattern, but then looking at how it needs to be best developed to meet new needs is something that you're really experienced in. Can you tell me a little bit more about your approach to that, and again for the tools of how you might go about doing that?
Well, it's interesting what you were saying about taking archive patterns and recolouring them, because I think for us quite often that's the first step, because it's amazing. Even with a fashion print, you just have to flip a few colours and it looks entirely different. It could be 3 different designs. So I always love that interplay of kind of colour, and you might use a bright colour like a geranium red or something that really pops, but you can ground that with earthier colours. So we always say a bit of a less is more, certainly for interiors. It's nice to have a little pop of something, but it really depends, again, on who's using the space and if it's an Instagram wall or if it's somewhere that, you want it to be relevant in 20 years' time. So, but I think from a colour perspective, it's very instinctive for me, because from a commercial perspective, it's about connecting with, with a kind of grander narrative that everyone can relate to. So it's a bit of a moment if something looks really beautiful, and quite often it can be quite unusual colour combination, something that's unexpected. So it might be a lilac with a mustard, or something that we haven't seen for a while. And actually the archive's amazing for that, because there's obviously every era covered and every country covered. It's like we can be looking at one design and go, but let's recolour it into something really fresh, and we might find something, from the 70s or the arts and crafts period or something. We're like, oh, that's really interesting and new. Let's try that in that. So, it's a bit of a mashup kind of thing. So it's very, there's no formula, I don't think. I think there's a formula for grounding brighter colours in interiors, because I think obviously if you have something super bright next to a bright white, it's like, whoa, and you can ground that with earthy earthy tones. But I think when it comes to the actual print, there are no sort of formulas. It's actually just playing with something until the design really speaks, or that moment where you've just cracked it, and it can be a tiny tweak of the tiniest bit of colour. And actually Janina always laughs at me because she's like, you've got a colour spectrum of about 1,000 colours, I have about 20. She's like, what colour is this? I'm like, it's kind of daffodil yellow, but it could be primrose, or it's it's like, I think with that design vocabulary of colours, you can very quickly, certainly with other designers, go, no, it's a bit more this or a bit more that, and it's just that trained eye and I think instinct. But yeah, I think it's just, when it's right, because it just you can feel it, it's there.
So do you have instances where one of your archive patterns might be informed by a colour palette on an entirely different pattern, where they both bring something different to the table for the project?
Yeah, definitely. I think when we did some woven fabrics for Soho House Manchester, and we were pulling out obviously mid-century prints to work with the branding, but then also wanting to bring in the Manchester element and sort of ground it with location too. So we used an archive, Manchester designer archive piece, which was lovely. Joan Charnley piece, and actually what we did was we recoloured it, but then we still had that kind of authenticity, and obviously being mid-century, it was about bringing in those kind of earthy tones and changing it to olive greens from the bright reds and blacks of this 1940s design that we used. So it was a really interesting process to bring all those elements together in one print. So location, colour, branding for Soho House. So it was, I actually really love constraints. I think it makes, as a designer, you much more creative.
Oh, it challenges you to push harder.
To be really, really creative.
Definitely.
I love the problem solving and all of that. So that's I feel is really great, in complete contrast to be given a white canvas where you just go like, design anything. I was like, for about a day.
Oh, that's definitely my experience too, that the limitations drive better results at the end.
I love that challenge.
I'm interested in what you just said about how you communicate the colours. So you communicate them with your clients and with your team by giving them names as references, as opposed to, CMYK codes or RGB codes.
Yeah, I mean, me and Kerry can be sat together and, in one sort of half an hour section, we'll be there sort of talking about probably 20 different colourways, 30 different colourways, and that tight design language between the two of us from the years of experience that we have, it's quite hilarious if anyone's listening. I'd be like, what? So yeah, it's really important, I think, as a designer, as you kind of build that design vocabulary from everything from space to print to every element of your toolbox. That's really, I think,
definitely
that efficient way of communicating in design is a meeting of minds, as we were, Rose, when we were working together on the collection. It becomes very synergistic, and you very quickly elevate each other's ideas because you've got that quick, lovely sort of way of understanding and synergy, which I always love working in collaboration for that reason. It's really, really lovely.
It brings joy to a project, doesn't it, when you can
joy,
work with somebody, which obviously is apparent in the 6 designs that we've got here. Rose, please, we've talked about the theory behind the colours and the process, but could you talk to us specifically about the colours that you selected for the 6 designs that you've launched?
Yeah, I think as Cheryl said, the process of us working together was really easy. It was an absolute joy to work with Cheryl. It helped that I only live up the road, so we had lots of meetings here, and it is as well such a stunning venue to have your work meetings. It's definitely not a bad place to visit. But it was just really easy and really collaborative. I think we worked so well together, and everything just flowed really easily. I think the sample, right from design brief, talking about what the collection was going to look like, selecting the designs, and then looking at scale, at the patterns, at the the structures and the backgrounds and the bases that we used. It all just flowed really easily. And I think even though a lot of technical thought went into it, it never felt like a strained project. There were never any points where it was like, oh God, what are we going to do? Or how should this work? It all just flowed so easily, and it came together so quickly and nicely. I think we were just on the same wavelength right from the beginning.
Sounds like it was quite intuitive,
totally
how it was drawn together.
It really was. And I think I'm never precious about kind of my own ideas, if you know what I mean. For me, it's about getting this right and making it look amazing. So if Rose comes in with something and says, oh, what about, I'm like, yep, defo, let's try that. You know, it's that feeling of letting things flow and move in the way that they should, which is really powerful, I think, in design.
Yeah, I think we complemented each other really well as well, because I think from Cheryl's, obviously Cheryl knows her archive inside out. So if I said, oh, maybe if we had something Japanese, then she'd be like, oh, I've got something for that. I can do something for that. And it was just really easy just to come up with the ideas and work together in that way. And, you know, Cheryl obviously did a lot of the design work, but then was comfortable with me looking at the textures and the bases and saying, well, actually, I think this is the one that's going to work. And I think our two skill sets just met perfectly in the middle to create a really beautiful collection.
It was lovely.
So each of the 6 designs, are they available in one colourway, or are there several colourways for each of the designs?
So what we did at the moment, everything is its own colourway. So they're all a unique colourway, but and Cheryl is more than happy to look at recolours and things like that. But we just felt everything had such a strong narrative. Each design's got such a strong story and feeling about it. We felt it was the best way to go, and to have more design in the collection than have less and then colourways of others. The way we generally work is if we're going to put colour palettes in, then we would have less designs. And we just couldn't whittle down from the 6 that were there. I mean, I think at one point there was probably about 8 that we really liked, and it was like, oh God, we've got to get rid of something. So I think it was just really important to get as much as we could into the collection and really give it the best chance for people to see the expanse of the work.
And I think also designers are, you know, they're very creative themselves. Interior designers kind of see something and they know, and I think there's much more customization that goes on. So you don't need to say, here's your 6 colorways. I think maybe more in retail, but I think it's almost like sparking the imagination with the collection, but then saying, right, now over to you. And you can like, you know, scale it, you can change colors, you can flatten it out and do it as a one color, or, you know, people kind of know that's an option. So I think that makes it more fun, really.
Yeah. And it's a wonderful thing to see how people interpret the designs. You know, we spend so much time on the design work, and you know, for anybody that's manufacturing for our, you know, Panaz and anybody that's doing that, so much of your heart as a designer goes into the projects that you do. But at the same time, there's nothing better for me than going in to see something and someone's totally reimagined something that I did. And it's like, wow, I love seeing other people's thoughts on how to change and use something. I mean, we recently did the roast restaurant in London, and that was something that we'd worked on 6 years. It was one of the first projects I did when I joined Newmor, but they'd taken something that we'd done, recoloured it, rescaled it, done it on a massive scale, like over 2 stories. It's like the entrance staircase. And it was the first time going into the restaurant to see it in situ. It was just like, wow. They'd literally completely redesigned it, but it made me feel proud of what we'd started, but also how they'd taken it themselves and redesigned it. It was just a beautiful thing to see. I think as creative people, I think we were all happy to see each other do something different with our creative start point. I think just creativity is just a beautiful thing, and it's really inspiring to see how other people interpret something that you've started.
It's wonderful to have that generosity to enable somebody else then to push it further forward. And Sarah, that must be something that you've got experience of, is playing with scale. Have you taken something initially perhaps intended to be a particular scale and then worked with the company to enlarge or decrease the size?
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, it's really refreshing when, just to touch on that point, when, you know, fabric manufacturers and designers are like, this is what we've got, but you can also add to that, which is really great, because it just feels a lot more like a collaboration, which is why this product launch is so important and so amazing. But scale is so important. I think we've probably all seen scale in pattern done wrong. In probably quite a few projects, but when done right, it's really powerful. And I think, you know, you've got 2 like extremes, haven't you? You can really scale a pattern down, so it actually starts to look more like a texture than a pattern, which is really lovely to bring through in a space. Or you can really scale it up. And the most important thing I always think to just consider is just what you're applying it to.
Yes.
So when you've got a large pattern, a large scale on a sofa, you're then looking at the pattern and you're not looking at the shape of the sofa and the curves, etc. So it all depends on where you're applying it to. Yeah. And also the size of the space. Like, for example, here we're in a really huge space, so you can go big on scale. Yes. Whereas you could be looking at, small little members clubs in London, and you just need to be slightly careful, as the space could then look a little bit small and a little bit tight if you're using sort of a bigger pattern and scale.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think one of the things we've touched on colour and we've looked at texture, but actually one of the things that we haven't addressed is actual motifs within the pattern design. And I'm really interested to know, Cheryl, with 50,000 documents, which I imagine takes some going through, but regardless, have you seen trends or similarities across the motifs that have been chosen for those pieces?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because the archive is vast, but everything often comes back to nature or a derivative of nature, and it always tickles me a bit that we're so human in that way, that we might think we're being fancied new, but actually when you break down most things, it comes from a floral or a foliage or something that comes from the natural world. And I think designers throughout the ages, from kind of the first cave paintings were probably interior design, weren't they? So I think there's a tendency to want to communicate the outside world. And I think as artists and designers, it's our kind of purpose really to communicate that beauty in a way that can connect to as many people as possible. And I think you might call it having a commercial eye, because obviously people buy those products, but actually it's about connecting something really beautiful to a lot of people. And I think if you can nail that, for me, that's doing my job really well. So interesting within the archive, obviously there's geos and stripes and, every formation of geometric, but there's so much kind of foliage and, from Art Nouveau stylized foliage to arts and crafts, very much like the Persian painter, through to big sort of 60s retro daisies. It's almost like the stylizing of it changes to fit with the kind of aspirations and aesthetics of the time, but actually it's still a floral. Yes, it doesn't matter. Call it what you want. It's like, it comes back to the things that we find comforting and familiar in the way we express ourselves. So I would say 95% of what's in the archive is derived from nature, however stylized. There's sort of 80s splashy kinds of, sort of neon pink things, but there's also kind of 1850s copper plates that are kind of so tiny and intricate, but and also conversational or sort of novelty pieces as well, which are quite fun. I think the craziest thing I've got in the archive is a kind of bunch of cockerels playing guitars on a wallpaper. Sometimes I have to stop and just go like, dear God, that was on someone's wall once somewhere in the world in time.
You didn't choose to incorporate the cockerels.
Tempting
Maybe
as it
next
was.
time, Cheryl. Maybe next time.
But actually, I'm really surprised to hear you say 95% is nature inspired. But, 100% of this collection has a nature element. Actually, I was talking to one of our guests earlier, because actually even the geometric pattern, I'm right in thinking there is a nature element behind.
In the background. Yeah,
so like a sort of trompe l'oeil effect. So even though we've got this very futuristic, tessellated, Singaporean inspired kind of trellis behind it, there's this kind of deep sort of azure blue sort of knocked back bamboo, which really gives you that depth. But of course there had to be nature in that sneaking in the background.
Rose, perhaps you could just tell us about the selection and development process behind some of the other motifs that you've launched.
I think between us, we just wanted a really broad range so that we were showing a bit of everything. So it was important to have even though it's a heritage range and it's got that vintage nostalgic vibe running through the whole collection, it was important to try and tick off as many bases as we could and give something to everybody for the collection. I mean, I think, generally, obviously we're in a very beautiful, ornate, traditional setting. But I think a lot of these designs are totally timeless and could work in very modern settings as well as vintage, beautiful, vintage type settings. And I think the imagery that Cheryl's pulled together, it really lends itself to anything. And I think everything does have that kind of fresh, modern feel, but also has really nice nods back to where it came from. I think, you know, one of the things I was saying earlier about being in the industry for so long, you do keep seeing the same things come round. Everything comes in its cycle, but it's always the same kind of things. Floral things, damasks, you know, tiles, geometrics. They just generally rotate. I think we're in a lovely time at the moment where virtually anything goes, which is really great from a pattern point of view and a design point of view. You literally can't do anything wrong, I don't think, at the minute. It's just pattern on pattern. There probably are some things, but there seems to be a home for everything at the moment. So we tried to incorporate that into the range and give something to everybody so that it'd be, you know, and for any space as well. I think some of them you would very specifically feel could be quite hospitality, hotel, you know, bars, restaurants, but actually with a bit of clever styling, which I'm sure you're all capable of, then you could put it anywhere, and you could make it work in any scheme. And I think that's the beauty of the collection.
And I think it came back to that problem-solving constraints. It was like when Kerry and I, my business partner, were sat deciding, like, right, who's this person? Where are they? But could that also work in a bar? And could that also work in a bedroom? And, you know, so it was that having that tightness of constraint, but then putting it together with colour and then putting it together with eclecticism. It kind of all happily came together in the end.
It's really exciting to hear that sort of anything goes, that the boundaries have been taken away. And Sarah, you were saying, when we spoke previously, that actually technology and some digital design you've seen emerging as a trend within pattern. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, over my sort of career as an interior designer, sort of you've seen patterns come in and trends go and new ones come in, and it has been that wave. And like Cheryl was saying, you do start to see repeats, don't you? You start to see nature come in quite a lot and geometrics come in quite a lot. But what we've noticed, and again through sort of our sourcing and research, is we've met a lot of quite young emerging designers who are textile designers. And we met a few at Decorex even last year, who are really sort of testing the boundaries, I think, with print and design, with new technology, which they can definitely use that better than I can, but really sort of distorting what could be a traditional motif or a traditional print and making it into something really fresh and really modern through technology, which feels really sort of refreshing to us as designers, that even though it's inspired by something quite traditional, they've got sort of one step in the future as well, and by using different colours and different scales, it creates quite an exciting pattern, which is really refreshing.
It'll be interesting to see those trends from those new designers coming through into our commercial sector, and to see how they can be incorporated within our commercial spaces. It's always exciting to see that process happen, isn't it?
Definitely. And again, it goes for designers in general, you know, everyone from different backgrounds, different places, they're all coming with new, fresh ideas. And that's really exciting to be able to sort of weave that into your project as well. I think if we always design from the same fabrics in the same studio, all our projects are going to look the same. So it's really important to find like the new collections like Newmor here today, or those new designers who are really, you know, spearheading and being culturally curious within the industry and bringing something new to the table, which is great.
I think it's quite interesting what you're saying about kind of new and younger designers. So actually when Kerry came in, who's got a purely fashion background, it was really interesting when I let her loose on quite a few sort of interiors ideas and concepts, and I really loved, and it's happening a lot in fashion because obviously we've got the lovely thing of watching that trickle through to interiors, the sort of trend side or ideas. But it was interesting to see her doing something totally different and bringing in a sort of fashion element to things, which look really fresh and new. So I'll be picking her brains again when she comes back off mat leave. I was like, what did you do with that Panama print when you warped it? Or did they, you know, it's like, it's very interesting. I like that kind of mashup really that's happening, and it's, you know, boundaries being blurred between the sort of traditional sort of ideas of what interior print is.
And hearing those fresh voices as part of your process. So we're going to have 2 quick fire questions, and then it will be your opportunity to ask Rose and Cheryl and Sarah your questions. So please do have a little think about what you would like to ask. Okay, ladies, the first quick fire question is, where do you find the most joy in pattern as a designer? I'm going to Sarah first.
You were gonna do
I know, I'm sorry. I'll do it the other way for the second question.
For me, the joy in pattern and design is definitely through travel. So, you know, when I'm going on trips, whether that's with work or personally, you see pattern daily. And that's really refreshing to see it in situ. For me, seeing it on a website doesn't do anything, but seeing it in real life and applied on different sort of spaces and fascias is really inspiring. And I think you can go to all corners of the world and it's being applied completely differently and influenced completely differently as well, whether that's certain colours, you know, we know certain areas, you know, even in Africa, really sort of use those earthy colours. That's quite traditional for that country and that continent. And you can see that coming through with that sort of pattern there as well. So definitely travel and seeing all those beautiful prints and patterns and bringing that in to our designs is definitely the most energizing part of it.
But I think that's part of being an exceptional designer, isn't it? You have to, and I really try with this, with Design Insider, is that you have to widen your gaze outside of only our commercial sector and find influence and inspiration from every corner, and that's what makes your projects and your products and your collaborations excel and have that excellence, because you've looked more widely.
And you know, they're naturally applied in different ways, in ways that we probably wouldn't even dare dream of. So that's quite refreshing as well. And we're constantly sort of zooming in on iPhone photos for trips to be like, this looks amazing, we should have this on. So
Fantastic answer. Thank you. Cheryl, where is the joy?
Obviously the archive, that's cheating, but and travel, I'm going to steal that one. So I just got back from Lisbon and I was like this on my photo reel going, how many tiles? But actually for me, it can be in the raw state. So actually we have these studio creative days where we get the team together and we are literally painting like artists together and we're chatting, the music's on, and actually watching each other's techniques and watching prints evolve is really like fresh for me. That's like coming from the human in front of you sort of thing, and that I find really inspiring, because a bit like you were saying before, we've all come from different backgrounds and experiences, but we're all in the same room with the same materials, yet this incredible diversity of work and beautiful colour and ideas all come together and we bounce off each other, and before you know it, no one's eaten anything and it's 6 hours in and we're like, oh my God, and the whole wall is full. And you know, that for me is a really, when everything is so digital, that lovely analogue process is really precious. So
it's really physical,
and being in a space with people and just letting the paint fly is really lovely.
Wonderful. Rose?
For me, and this probably sounds like a cheesy answer, but literally I see pattern everywhere. I think because I've been doing it so long, and as a wallpaper designer, it is such a technical job, and you're literally thinking about pattern constantly. Anybody that's had to walk anywhere with me, David will know this, anybody that's ever walked anywhere with me will be talking and I'm not there. Because I've stopped, because I've seen something lovely on the floor or a front door or just the most random thing, and stopped and I'm taking a picture, and whoever's there is like, Rose, I was talking to you, what are you doing? And I'm really sorry, that bit of London tube floor, just really pretty. And I literally do that constantly, and I see pattern everywhere in the most random things, in beautiful pieces of stone, in tiles, in everything. But I like quite close detail, so often my camera roll just looks like nothing. It's just like, so you went to Morocco? Yeah, where's the pictures of Morocco? There aren't any. It's just all the very small things I saw, and the bags of spice in the shop just look so pretty. And it probably seems a bit nuts to a lot of people, but it's just the way I'm programmed now. I think I've been doing it for so long, I can literally see pattern in everything.
I suppose if we spend time with Rose, we need to allow a bit of extra to make sure.
Don't walk anywhere with me, because I'll be like miles behind snapping things.
So round 2 of quick fire. Because obviously we want to leave with pattern as this tool in our toolbox. What is key to successfully adding pattern into our toolbox? Just if there was one piece of advice for each of our guests to take away with them, what is key to achieve that, Rose?
Personally, I like one thing that's pattern, a bit like my outfit today. It's all about the blazer. That's the way I use pattern in my own home, in my dress sense. I like to have one thing that really stands out, and then pair everything else with it.
Yeah.
So if I was, I mean, for anybody that's not used to using pattern often, I would say, you know, if you picked a feature wall or a beautiful fabric that was your, you know, your feature cushion, and then build your space around it, bring in your colours, bring in your textures to easily make a cohesive scheme. But I like one thing that's the focus, and then sort of work out from it.
Fantastic. Cheryl?
Yeah, I think I would say the same, like having an anchor, working out if you're lacking in confidence. But I also think it's okay to get things wrong. I remember painting a living room carrot orange once. I was very young. I think I was about 23. It was brave. But I think only by having a go and doing things, actually. And I think the trouble is we're bombarded with information. So it's quite difficult to find your own taste and your own design sovereignty. And I think living with things in your space for a while and thinking, do I love that, or do I love it because I've seen it in someone else's space? It's like, I think trusting your instincts more than your mind. I think if you love something, I say don't buy it until you love it, and that's my adage with everything. And if it's a chair or if it's a cushion, then you know, if you buy something that you absolutely love, that becomes then the spark for the rest of the room, I think you literally can't go wrong. So I mean, I'm obsessed. I can mash up also. Our living room is like a Technicolor kind of Persian palacey type pink room, but I'm moving away from the carrot orange. But you know, it's about balance. And I think if you start with something you love, like our Persian Kerman rug, where I rolled it out and I went, now we need to decorate the entire room, because it didn't work. But I love it, and I still love it now. And every time I walk into the living room, I'm like, oh, you know, and it's that for me, you can't go wrong with. So it's instinct and love, really. Yeah.
It goes back to that intuitive nature. If you love it, then it's also going to have increased longevity, which is better for the sustainability angle as well. Sarah?
I would say be brave. I feel like pattern is beautiful, and you know, we see it every day. And I think if you're looking at your own home, you'd only be brave enough to put it on a cushion or a little feature that you can easily remove. And I would say just be a bit braver with it. You know, upholster your sofa in a pattern, do a carpet in a pattern, because I do think sort of the bigger impact that you do, the more bolder design choices that you can have. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Fantastic advice. Thank you so much. Now, I'm hoping that we have somebody super helpful with a roaming mic. Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Would anybody like to put their hand up and ask a question? Ah, there we go. Just right at the back there. Hi.
So it's hard to escape AI and image generation technology at the moment. And I'd be interested in opinions around how you think it might fit into the pattern creation process and accordingly into design.
That's a fantastic question, Rolly, because I was desperate to ask about AI when we talked about technology earlier. So thank you. Who would like to answer?
I've got an answer. But I think AI is really interesting. I think that it is definitely helpful. There's no doubt about that. It can be an amazing tool. But my personal experience of AI is it still needs a person to mold it, to shape it, to make sure it's going in the right direction. I mean, an example of that is we've been using generative AI quite a lot in Photoshop lately. If there's a weird lamp or something we don't like in a room, then we'll ask it to remove it. But the amount of crazy things Photoshop will throw into that space, it's literally nuts. You've got like wine glasses turning up when you wanted a lamp. It's crazy. And I think even when you find the right thing, there's still like those fine tuning you need to do. So I think it's a great tool, but I don't think you can ever not have that human element as well. And even from an artwork point of view, you know, I see a lot of artwork all the time, and these days I'm much more perceptive to things that are hand drawn, that have got that human element. I think we went through a patch where there was so much computer generated material that it became a bit sort of almost too samey and really quite boring. I love people to come to me with an actually hand painted piece of artwork, because for me that is now becoming a lost skill. It's something that people aren't doing as much anymore. So that's really refreshing, and it's a great thing to see that there's still people out there that have that skill and it's not being lost.
Would you like to add to that?
Yeah, well, I wrote a blog last year and did a talk at the London Design Fair about AI and the impact and how the whole landscape of design is changing, will change. So, I mean, personally in our studio, we definitely have it as a tool. I think, we are. Weirdly, it's had the opposite effect on us. We've got it, we use it occasionally. We use it for a lot of room sets and kind of inspiration for things. It's there, but it's had the opposite effect. We've kind of gone back to analog and gone painting because, we can use it. Yes, it's there. No doubt in 2 years' time, we'll be able to click a finger and have perfect designs in repeat. But I think there's no narrative with it at all. So for us, it's about our studio. People like to see us hand painting. I think it's about human connection. And I think AI is a fantastic tool. And it's not to be underestimated because it is changing things very rapidly. But I think humans will always want to connect with humans. And I think, the two can work quite well together in our eyes. So, but it's definitely one to watch as well. It's definitely changing technology as well. And I mean, we get a lot of people coming to us saying, I've got this great design, I want to put it onto fabric, but they don't know how to put things in repeat or have that commercial element. So, we're finding ourselves being a conduit of people's creativity and then being able to elevate. So in some ways it's become a democratizing design tool, and it's about IP and ideas, which is another aspect of design. But actually, I think it's going to shake things up, which I think is not a bad thing. Actually,
I think AI is definitely, it's here for the long time.
Yes, it is.
And it's only going to develop. And we're very much of the attitude: if you can't beat them, join them. And we have the challenge at Jolie is we produce all our visuals in-house by CGI. We have a CGI artist and we create those amazing renders of what a space will look like. AI is now a tool that can do that for you, which is great. But like you say, it's not 100% accurate. But what AI could be really good for with ourselves and as designers is to give you that initial sort of like creative direction, that really quick, it's kind of going to look like this. Which is great for that sort of fast-paced work, that pitch work, that we can pull together visuals, which are, potentially like a vignette of an armchair with a side table, but you get the vibe of what's going to happen with the space. So we're actually looking at researching and how we can bring that in with our process as well. Because I think it is important. Technology is going to make things slightly better as well and slightly quicker. So we want to join them on that journey and see what we can develop as part of that.
So AI, I think, is such an important conversation. We actually held a Design Insider AI forum a couple of months ago, but it's a campaign topic that we're covering throughout 2024 on Design Insider. And we've had so many really interesting AI conversations that we've published on our platform, including one that took place at Clerkenwell Design Week and is within our Clerkenwell Design Week trend report. So please do take a look at that content if you're interested in delving into that AI topic in more detail. And it addresses some of the things, obviously, that we've talked about just now, but also about how you feed your data into your AI model. And I think if you're using your own data to generate further ideas and further work, and you're not using resource from other places, that's a completely different way of using it as a tool. So there's quite a lot of different ways that you can start to look at that and integrate it into your workflow, or not, and choose not to. And just one more note on that is that next week we'll publish an article on Design Insider with an IP lawyer talking about specifically about IP and the use of AI. So if that's something that you've been thinking about and is perhaps a barrier, he's got some extremely interesting information on there. So have a look on Design Insider for that. Has anybody else got a question that they'd like to ask? Oh, there we go.
Hi, you talked a little bit earlier about like timeless design and how things can be sustainable in design. I was wondering what your perspectives were on what constitutes a timeless design and what might constitute a more trendy design, and how you implement that in your practices, all three of you.
I think for me, there's a distinction between timeless and classic. So obviously classic would be your sort of checks or animal prints or, tartans, whatever, that endure and come back in cycles. What I mean by sort of timeless design is something that's so beautifully executed, it never really dates. It's unusual enough not to fit in a box. But it can be, there could be elements of it that usually it's really beautifully drawn, or there's just a lot of really gorgeous elements to it, or it's that heart connection of, it could be a beautiful wilty flower, or it could be just the way something's painted, it could be the light, or there's just something, it's a bit of a je ne sais pas what it is, but there's always just something, and it's difficult to put your finger on, but you know it when you see it, and it's a stunner, and it'll always have legs and continue. So I think it's a combination of a lot of things, but it's something that stands out really beautifully, and you just know it when you see it.
I think that's a really nice point. I think for me, it's almost like a golden triangle of colour, pattern and texture. I think when those three things are all just right, something is just going to be
it's magic.
A forever piece. And I think that could be anything, a handbag, a wall covering, anything. But when all those things are just right, it'll never date, and you'll always be able to use it.
Thank you.
I was just going to add to that as well. I think for something to be timeless as well, it's not to sort of copy off something else. I think we're constantly seeing, prints potentially being reused, and it's copied from a famous print, or interiors copying from the latest, hotel opening. And I think it's really important when you're thinking of that timeless quality that it's really authentic and it's got a purpose. And, I feel like that ties it back down to something more meaningful.
I think we've got time for just one more question before we welcome David back to the stage. Has anybody else got a question that they'd like to ask? Right at the front, just here. It's Rita.
Hi. First of all, it's been fabulous listening to you all. Really interesting.
Rita.
And you've covered about 10 questions I wanted to ask Alys. I thought it was really interesting when you talked about creating spaces that evoked emotions. Does geography have something to do with that as well? Because we talked about the lines between different commercial spaces being blurred. I get that. But what if one hotel's in, I don't know, London, or one's in Madrid, or how does that affect what design and colour palettes you might use?
Yeah, it definitely does affect it. We always try to bring in a bit of a research-driven piece into every project that we look at. We're actually looking at a hotel down in Cornwall at the moment, and the interiors are beautiful already, existing interiors. But when you're in that space, you can't tell you're in Cornwall. You could be anywhere within the UK. So it's really important that you do tie it back to where that is. However, you don't want it to be really themey like Disneyland. You want it to be really subtle. So, for example, you don't want whitewashed timber everywhere within that hotel in Cornwall. But potentially you want, the plate that you're having your dinner on in the evening in the restaurant to be a Cornish pottery or something like that. But it's those subtle elements that you can bring through within a space that you don't notice straight away. But as you're experiencing them, you get a real feel for the space and the heart of where it is as well.
So it's like an extension of the narrative that you're telling through your pattern choices, and through your material selection, right into all of the pieces that you're interacting with within that space.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's quite interesting from a pattern perspective how you can bring in that tool as well. It's quite interesting. I'm working with an Iranian lady at the moment, which is my new hyper focus, which I'm like, what? We get to design beautiful Persian things. But it's really interesting because I learn a lot when I work with a hotel or when I work with a client where it's, or, like we did, Rose, it was just like, right. So for me, it's just a really lovely immersive thing to be in the space, be in the location, really understand where that place is and what talks to it, what the history is of the building, and just bringing all those gorgeous narratives in and around the piece. So then when I come to design the pattern, it's already infused in my sort of creative energy, and it doesn't have to be obvious. Like you were saying, it doesn't have to be a seascape. It can be something that kind of just talks in a more subtle way, but has something that connects it to the land around or the place or the history even of the building and the narrative in the building. So yeah, it can be subtle, but it can also be fun and really obvious too. So yeah, I think in a homogenized world, it's really important as well, actually.
I think another thing to add to that as well is, you know, in some of the people that we work with large hotel chains that traditionally would roll out the same scheme for every single branch, no matter where it was. And that's really not the case anymore. We do so much bespoke work, a lot of bespoke digital work for those chains to make each venue really speak to its surroundings. And so as soon as you go in, I mean, sometimes it can be very literal, though, Sarah. Sorry to say that. But sometimes there's literally a map of Cornwall on the wall. But it's, you know, different levels of different things. But I think just that whole idea of making the effort to make it fit with the space it's in and the locality is actually a really nice move forward in interiors anyway, that they want.
But ultimately, those hotel chains are bringing their guest experience to the core of what they're doing. And that's why they're addressing their guest experience differently in each of those locations.
Yeah. And it's back to emotion again. It is. And that emotion and connection and you living the place that you visited and having that memorable moment.
Yeah.
I think also I wonder as well if as a local person to that hotel, you then also feel that you belong because you have some connection to that space. So it's just not another hotel or another chain. It's, you know, there's some integrity to the actual space for whoever's using that space, visiting or not. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, in 1 second, David's just going to come back on and speak to us. But before he does, I would like to thank you, Rose and Cheryl and Sarah, so much for being so generous with your expertise for our guests today. Please, everybody, join me in thanking them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. That was a fantastic talk. Really enjoyed that. Some insightful points of view. So thank you once again.